There are footballers you enjoy watching. There are footballers you rely on. Then there are those footballers whose careers you quietly track because you sense that there's something bigger unfolding. Bukayo Saka firmly belongs in that third category. This is the hype video. This is the compilation of goal and assists. And this is not about crowning him very early. This is about Project Saka, a long-term journey carefully unfolding and will end with Saka joining the most exclusive group at Arsenal Football Club, the Immortals. Because at Arsenal, greatness alone is not enough. To be immortal, you have to basically define an era, carry the weight of the club, and leave behind something permanent. So the question we're going to ask ourselves right now is Saka on that path? Which brings me to the first analysis I'm going to talk about today. What does it take to be an immortal at a club like Arsenal Football Club? When you say Arsenal, what comes to mind? Thierry Henry scored over 200 goals, won several Premier League titles, FA Cups. Patrick Vieira, our charismatic captain who was with us through a very long period of time, led us to so many trophies, and of course, no one can forget his penalty in the 2005 FA Cup. Funny enough, that penalty turned out to be Arsenal's last trophy for 9 years. Yeah, 9 years. There was a time when we were fully in the trenches with Arsene Wenger, and he took an FA Cup win in 2014 to actually bring us back to a trophy. I remember how that moment was a game against Hull City. I think they scored us 2 goals first. Then the most needed 3 when Fabianski had some kind of error. Then of course Kieran Gibbs was on hand to clear the ball off the line. Then Santi Cazorla fired in a free kick. Then Laurent Koscielny scored a late goal. Then going into extra time, Aaron Ramsey, yeah, I almost said Aaron Ramsdale. Aaron Ramsey now scored the final goal that he was an athlete to me. That was an iconic moment in the club. And these are the things we keep following because even after we won that trophy in 2014, Arsene Wenger went on to win other FA Cups in 2015, I think 2017 as well. 2015 was the one where we smashed Aston Villa 4-0. I think Alexis Sanchez was very key in that game. 2017 was the one against Chelsea where Bukayo Saka was not fully fit, but he somehow managed to play in that final. I think Diego Costa scored us first, then we now equalized and got the winner. We didn't have any other trophy till 2020, which actually turned out to be the last trophy at Arsenal Football Club. I'm not talking about the Community Shield, I'm not talking about the Emirates Cup, that doesn't matter. What we're focused on today is how Saka can chart his own path to Arsenal immortality. But of course, there's no better place to start than where it all began. Hale End. This academy has seen some amazing players come through these ranks and make it the Arsenal Football Club. Before the time of Bukayo Saka, we had the likes of Jack Wilshere, who was touted to be one of the most generational talents in his class, pretty much. I'll never forget that game against Barcelona in the Champions League. I know that was 2010 or 2011, where Wilshere was bossing the entire field. And of course, we all know what happened to him, had that terrible injury, and that kind of really delayed his progress. But after the time of Wilshere, we had some other young players. In Saka's time, we had Emil Smith-Rowe, we had Eddie Nketiah, we had Reece Nelson, we had Ainsley Maitland-Niles, yes, and of course we had Saka. And these lads were very, very important players. As at 2016, the youth coach at Arsenal, who was Trevor Bumstead, said that Bukayo Saka always stood out in the younger teams. This coach classifies Saka as a fantastic decision maker, He knew when to beat people, he knew when to pass, as well as having brilliant physical attributes and a really good character and personality. Bukayo Saka turned 17, I think it was in 2021 or thereabout, and obviously he went ahead to sign a professional contract with the club. We now ensured that he started playing consistently for us, and I think he made his debut for Arsenal in the Europa League against Voxla Poltava. That was when we were seeing the trenches. I said, let's even backtrack. Can you remember when there was a time in our lives as Arsenal fans where Arsene Wenger was always battling with Sir Alex Ferguson, and it was all about Arsenal comes first, Man U comes second, Arsenal comes second, 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 Man U is first, first, first. And in our mind, this was like a birthright to us. Then when we missed out on Champions League for the very first time, no, when we missed out on top position, that's not even Mourinho came into the picture. Then Wenger made that famous quote that top four is a trophy. Arsenal fans were like, what do you mean? Blah, 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 blah. We actually got to a point in our time as Arsenal fans where we no longer were even in the top four. Under Arsene Wenger, in the latter years of his career with us before he left the club, we were struggling in Europa League. And even when my Emery joined the club, we were still in the Europa League. And of course, Mikel Arteta, when he also joined, we were still in the Europa League. So we entered the Europa League for so many seasons, and Arsenal fans were kind of shocked because we become so accustomed to life in the Champions League. But one key thing about the Europa League, like the Carabao Cup back in the day, was that it offered us the chance to unearth some young talent. And Bukayo Saka, on 29th November 2018, which was 8 years ago, as a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old, made his debut for the team. He came on as a 68-minute substitute for Aaron Ramsey, and of course, he made his full debut in our next Europa League game against Karabakh. Oh my God. Karabakh was a team in Azerbaijan, if I remember, yes. And obviously, when you're in the Europa League, those are the kind of teams you play. Right now, we're balling in the Champions League, 7 games played, 7 victories. Our boys are basically cooking. And of course, because of the fact that we are currently in the top 2, all our second leg games are going to be at the Emirates. From the round of 16 to the quarterfinals, to the semi-finals, and of course, the finals being a neutral ground. The one key thing to note here was that when Saka was still growing up at the Hale End, these were the kind of games he had to play to, gain more experience. He eventually made his Premier League debut. I think we were number 77, looking so small and whatnot. Yeah, when he came on for Alex Iwobi in the game against Fulham, it was the 83rd minute sub, and that was when he became the first player born in 2001 actually to play in the Premier League match. When Saka was part of that team that went all the way to the Europa League final in 2019. That was under my Emery. That was a very terrible season where we had Champions League qualification in the bag. But towards the last, 5 to 10 games of the campaign, I started playing terribly. I think I need to find those results. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. Let me see if I can quickly check on Wiki to see the games that Arsenal played. That was the 2018-19 campaign. Yes. So Arsenal 2018-19 Wiki. Of course, yep. So how did we fare in the Premier League in that campaign? Yeah. As at March 10th, Arsenal defeated Man United 2-0 and we're balling, right? It was goals from Granit Xhaka and a penalty from Aubameyang. April 1st, we won Newcastle 2-0, goals from Ramsey and Alexander Lacazette. Then the terrible run of fixtures came on. Like, at that point in time, I think that game with 31, we were like third or thereabout. At least we're in a very comfortable position in the Premier League. Then the trenches started. Arsenal visited Everton in Goodison Park. Phil Jagielka, their captain back in the day, scored a header, 1-0. Okay. Arsenal then played against Watford. Troy Deeney and the man with the cojones, he got a red card in that game. It was an elbow or thereabout. Then Aubameyang scored the only goal for us. Then we now had three losses in a row, three shocking losses. Arsenal, Crystal Palace. I'll never forget that game. Benteke scored first. Mesut Ozil equalized. Wilfred Zaha scored. Then James McArthur scored. Aubameyang made it 2-3, and for some reason Arsenal could not come back. Okay, we've lost the game against Crystal Palace. We are playing Wolves next. At least Wolves are not doing that well. We can see how we can get a result against Wolves, right? Arsenal visit Wolves. The first goal was scored by Matt Doherty. Then Ruben Neves made it 2-0. Then the late Diego Jota made it 3-0. And of course, our defensive Spartan, Socrates Papasatopoulos, that guy's name was so legendary back in the day. Made it 3-1, and Arsenal lost that game. 3 games left in the season. Arsenal visited Leicester City, where Anthony Maitland now has got a red card. Yuri Tielemans scored, then Jimmy Vardy scored 2 late goals. Despite our draw with Brighton and a win in Burnley on the last day, Arsenal finished in 5th place. Okay. In that same season, we played Man United in the FA Cup, where Jesse Lingard scored and was doing that stupid moonwalk. I'll never forget that thing. That was just pathetic. But yes, you have lost out on the Champions League qualification, right? You have a second chance in the Europa League against Chelsea, a team that already qualified for the Champions League. What did you do on that day? We stunk up the place. Emery had the record of being someone that was so good with Europa League. He had won 1 billion trophies with Sevilla, right? But unfortunately, on that day against Chelsea, Arsenal was smashed up the park. We lost 4-1. This essentially meant that going into the 1920 campaign, Arsenal missed out on Champions League football and had to now work, in the Europa League. That was quite terrible, but we didn't know that even a whole lot more was going to happen as the season progressed. And what happened? When Arsenal beat Bournemouth in October 2019, we now went on a terrible run of results. Lost to Sheffield United, drew with Crystal Palace, drew with Wolves, lost to Leicester, drew with Southampton, drew with Norwich, lost to Brighton. Then, of course, that's when Unai Emery was done. We now brought in Freddie Ljungberg to play against West Ham. We won that game. Then Man City trashed us. Then Mikel Arteta now finally made his first appearance in the 0-0 draw against Everton. He was in the stands that day before playing against Bournemouth. We all know how that season panned out. That's now went ahead and finished in 8th place. And at that first full season, he now finished in 8th place again. And 21-22, he finished in 5th place. Then the last 3 campaigns have been second. But going back to Saka, when he was in the Hale End, he was not a finished product at that point in time, because the Hale End was all about teaching players responsibility, teaching players intelligence, emotional discipline. But what was important was that Saka came into the Arsenal team when we were in the transition. We had the post-Wenger uncertainty. Our identity was already very fractured, and our fans were searching for something to believe in. And quietly, without any announcement, Saka started offering that belief. Not through speeches, not through bravado, but through his availability. Whether it was as a left back or as a left wing back, there was this young lad that just kept on playing consistently for us, giving us some very good performances, bumping down the flank with his speed. He showed very good tactical intelligence for quite the young age that he was on. He showed very, very good emotional maturity. I remember that Saka was a player that was so young, but he played like someone that was really old, and there was that fearless commitment to his responsibility. It's all about timing. And that was what made it very clear that Arsenal had a gem in their hands, and it was important to harness that talent. Which brings us to when potential turned to responsibility. Breaking into the first team was one part, but he had to now continue in that stead. In 2019-2020, after I was coming into the helm after Nigeria had been a full mess, Saka started playing some games, and obviously when Saeed Kolasinac and Kieran Tierney started having some injuries, Saka established himself in the first team as a left back, and he continued to play in that position, scored the opening goal when we played against Bournemouth in the FA Cup, and continued to, play consistently. But one thing that stood out was that as the campaigns progressed, Saka's responsibility progressed. Then the turning point happened when Ateta switched him from left back to right wing. And guys, bear this in mind. Arsenal had our record signing, Nicolas Pepe, as the right winger at that point in time. We also had the pensioner, William, who joined us at that point too. But they were basically stinking up the place. And eventually, Saka was brought on to play in that position, cutting him from his favored left foot. And that was when it tipped for him. There's always a precise moment where every great Arsenal career is being admired and relied upon. Saka's own came earlier than expected, two different managers, two different systems, two different levels of stability, but one thing was constant. When we gave the ball to Saka on that right wing, he was always keen to make something work. Yes, he was getting kicked off the park because obviously as a young lad with that amount of speed, he was kind of giving me those Iron Robben vibes back in the day when he just, when he was coming through in the ranks. Because what he was really focused on back then was to, try and impact the attack. And in the 1920 campaign, Saka was a very influential player for us. I think he finished that season with how many appearances? Let me verify that real quick. In terms of goals, he scored just 4 goals for us that season. 1 in the Premier League, 1 in the FA Cup, and 2 goals in the Europa League. But he had the most assists. He had 12 assists for Arsenal in that campaign, because this was the season where he was now playing more on the right-hand side. In the Premier League, he had 5 assists. In the FA Cup, he had 1. In the FA Cup, he had 1. In the Europa League, he had 5, taking his tally to 12. So Saka was growing in prominence in the club. That responsibility was being bestowed upon him, and he took it with both arms. There's a kind of young players that you give this kind of responsibility, and it will become a burden to them. There are many clubs you can think of where there's a young lad that has more potential. I saw like Ansu Fati. I remember when he took the number 10 jersey after Lionel Messi had left the club, and Barcelona fans were like so hyped on Fati that this is the next best thing since fried plantain. He's the one that's going to take us to the promised land, yada. But the pressure was too much for Fati, and obviously we know how he buckled. Now he's playing his football in Monaco. Although the same thing has happened in Lamine Yamal, but Lamine Yamal obviously has that talent and he has kind of showed himself and he's doing well. But as at this point in time, Saka was no longer the kid. He was now our outlet. He was the solution. He was our emotional release valve, pretty much. And that's what separated him from many youngsters. As I said earlier, many of them would have run away from that responsibility, but Saka shouldered it. He was like, you know what? Yes, I'm very young. I'm 19 at that point in time, but he was a first team player and he burdened that responsibility. Yeah, there are people like Aubameyang and Co that were older than him in the squad, in leadership and all that. But one key thing was that Saka didn't run away from that responsibility. He didn't demand any freedom. He didn't want any individual shine. He just accepted that burden and carried it on quietly, which was very key. In the 2020s, Saka started progressing well. One key thing to note was that his creativity was really good, and there was end product with it. And that was not normal. That was elite psychology. It was important to see how he had really grown leaps and bounds in the team, and everyone knew that this was the outlet they were going to use. Obviously, it became a problem because teams were always trying to, attack, basically double up on him because they knew what he was capable of doing. But he never shied away from it. He kept on playing well. And obviously, Arsenal finished in 5th place in 21-22 campaign. That was a season where Saka and Smith Rowe were very key for us. I think Saka scored like 11 or 12 goals in that season very influential player for us. And that's probably brings us to the next part, which is his numbers, his consistency, and his elite output. Bukayo Saka, if you look at this slide, you can see how his stats have progressed from when he broke out into the first team in 1920 till date. Obviously, there was a certain regression because of that long-term injury he suffered last season. But let's just take some time out to look at these numbers, these elite numbers. Starting with 1920, he started 19 games for us, with 7 as a substitute, 1 goal, 5 assists. In England, he played in the Nations League. Obviously, he made his debut then. In the Europa League, he played 8 games, 2 goals, 3 assists. In 2021, which was the season where he basically grew into prominence at Arsenal, in the Premier League alone, Saka had 11 goals with 7 assists. While in the EFL Cup, he had 1 goal in 3 games. Oh yeah, you also worth noting that Saka played all 38 games for Arsenal in 21-22, and that was 5 seasons ago when he was just 19. So you can see that he was also an ever-present player who was very consistent for us with his minutes. Then in the 21-22 campaign, he played all 38 games, 11 goals, 7 assists. Of course, for England, he played 5 games for his nation, scored 3 goals and had 1 assist. Then 22-23 was the season that Arsenal were challenging for the Premier League. That was a very, very lovely campaign. The players did very well, but we fell in the last hurdle to Man City. When we had that terrible run of results, we had a draw against Southampton, a draw against West Ham, a draw against Liverpool, and of course when we lost 4-1 to Man City and lost to Nottingham Forest, that title challenge was over. But on a personal note, Saka scored 14 goals for Arsenal and he had 11 assists. In the Europa League, he played 8 games, scored just 1 goal. Although then again, in the group stages, he hardly featured. I think that's when we were playing Marquinhos and the rest of the lads. But when we got to the knockout round against Sporting CP, that was the game I'll never forget because that was the game where we lost both Takehiro Tomiyasu and William Saliba. Saliba had an injury there, played against Fulham, and aggravated it. And of course, when Holding came on for Saliba, we all know that was where our defense crumbled. But Saka had 14 goals in that campaign, had 11 assists, and continued to cook. 23-24 was even better for the winger because this time he had 16 goals in the Premier League and 9 assists. You can see from 1 goal in the Premier League to 11 goals in the Premier League to 14 goals in the Premier League to 16 goals in the Premier League. So Saka just kept on going in that high trajectory. Obviously, he also played in the Champions League. In 9 games for us in the Champions League, he scored 4. That was the campaign limited by Bayern Munich. That was a very, very painful campaign in the Champions League. We went into the knockout round against Porto. David Raya was the hero of that night, the penalty shootout. But against Bayern, we did 2-2 at the Emirates. Yeah, where Saka was tackled by Manuel Neuer, but the ref didn't give the penalty. And when we visited the Allianz Arena, and Joshua Kimmich scored the only goal that kind of took us out, and that was it for our Champions League campaign. But we see the progress that Saka continued to make. He had 16 goals, which was his personal best, and of course 9 assists, to a goal contribution of 25. He was basically our talisman at that point in time. Then last season happened. Last season, Saka was playing well. He already had 6 goals and 10 assists before that terrible injury against Crystal Palace, where he was trying to receive a pass or something and he damaged his hamstring. I think he tore it off the bone or something. And that was where he was out for, was it 4 months? I think it was 4 months or so, yes. But since then, it has been a different journey. Saka has had his struggles, bearing in mind that, he was trying to come back into full fitness. It's not going to be easy for him. But last season, he came towards the end of the season, like around April or thereabout, played a couple of games. and didn't come back to that level that we knew of him. So one thing we did well this campaign was that we now finally signed a right winger that can allow us to now give Saka the rest that he deserves in some games. And that's when the Madueke comes into the picture. Last season when we had Raheem Sterling, he was a complete apology, like a terrible player we had in the team that time. To the level where we had to start benching him, and we even had to deploy a 17-year-old with Wanere to play on that right hand position. And Wanere did okay in all honesty, but that was where Sterling was supposed to be playing. But just because of how bad he was for us, you could see that we could not use him. But this campaign, Saka has played 20 games in the Premier League, and he has scored 4 goals and had 3 assists. So yeah, this is a massive regression from what we've come to expect from him. But these statistics clearly show that Saka has continued to keep improving up until this campaign, where they kind of had like a start-stop, moment, and we're expecting a whole lot more from him. We know that right now he has not scored in like 8 Premier League games, but Saka's numbers have already placed him as basically one of the elite wide players in the world. If you want to talk about the best right wingers in the world right now, you would call Mohamed Salah, you call Lamine Yamal, and you certainly call Bukayo Saka. I'm certain that he's among the top 3 or top 5 at the very least in the world. And I said Rafinha, but Rafinha plays more on the left, even though Adele playing on the right hand side. But one key thing that right now Saka has been giving us many goals from open play, many assists against low blocks, and of course end product in high profile matches. But what elevates Saka beyond his raw output is what he produces. Saka is like a player that holds with when needed. He drags defenders out of shape. He creates space for others. His relationship with Martin Odegaard and either Ben White or Joe Timber on that right hand side is quite exemplary. They play like they know themselves telepathically. And of course, most importantly, Saka is always available. Up until last season, he has played so many games for us, over 200 appearances. And of course, great players shine, immortals endure. But Saka's reliability has become a very signature trait for him. One good thing to note now is that, despite the fact that he's always reliable for us, he has really had some benching this season because a player like Madueke is good enough as well. And having Madueke on the coming to the side allows Saka to get some well-deserved rest. I can call a couple of games in the campaign where he was rested. What that comes to mind is the games against Brentford in the Premier League. That was a good game. He got some rest. And of course, the game against let me see if I can get some other games that I know Saka got some rest from. But I know you have been a very important player for all this campaign. But one key thing to note is that Ateta has really, really managed his minutes this season. In the entire campaign, let's see. Okay, she was rested against Olympiacos. Yes, she was on the bench in that game. Came on as a sub and scored a goal. He was also on the bench against Brighton, but that was in the EFL Cup because obviously left them get to rest their players for that game. Which other game was on the bench? Yeah, Brentford. I've mentioned Brentford. Against Club Brugge too, he was on the bench. That was good. Crystal Palace in the EFL Cup quarterfinals, he was also on the bench. Then when we played Bournemouth, he was also on the bench in that game, and he came on as a sub and got an assist for Declan Rice. Against Portsmouth, he was on the bench. And our last Premier League game against Nottingham Forest, he was also on the bench. What is key here is that Saka had become very fresh. Going into each game, we can expect elite numbers from him. And despite the fact that he played 90 minutes against Inter Milan, I'm very certain that he's going to start against Manchester United on Sunday. Now let's talk about the big games, the big moments, the big pressure. Looking at this slide, this was that amazing goal he scored against Real Madrid last season. That was one game that basically made Arsenal sure that they have come of age. Yes, Declan Rice will always be remembered for his 2 amazing free kicks when we smashed them 3-0 at the Emirates. Merino scored the final goal as well. But when we visited the Bernabeu Stadium, Saka scored a very lovely chip. He also missed a penalty in that game, if I recall, while Martinelli kind of put the nail in the coffin. But in those big games, Saka really stepped up. There have been some games here where he had been found wanting to. But one key thing to note is that Immortality is not built against bottom half teams. Immortality is forged in these four prongs: title runnings, knockout football, hostile away grounds, and moments where fear is expected. Let's talk about title runnings. Come on. For the last three campaigns in a row, Arsenal have been involved in title running, and you can see the amount of support that Saka has been doing to us in that regard. 22-23, he scored 14 goals. Arsenal scored, I think, 88 goals that campaign, which was our highest ever. Before we now broke it in the next campaign, when we scored 91 goals, I think. And Saka scored 16 as well in that season. So you can see in all our title runnings, Saka has been a very prominent player for us, showing up when they have been counted, proving that he has been our talisman. Let's talk knockout football. Arsenal went to the semi-finals of the Champions League last season, with loss to PSG. Saka even scored in the game, if I recall. Yeah, but over two legs, Arsenal fumbled. We had an XG of 5.1 in the two legs, scored only one goal. PSG, on the other hand, had the XG of 1.85 and they scored three goals. So our lack of clinical finishing really hurt us in that game. But Saka was someone that played very well. In the game, and impact the praise. He scored, yes. He had some big chances that he missed too. But there was one amazing corner that he played that was supposed to go to the top corner. But Donnarumma was on fire. Donnarumma was basically the reason why Arsenal didn't go to the final last season. At the Emirates, he made some very, very important saves. Yes, there was the VAR call where Mikel Merino scored, but it was cancelled out. But Saka is someone that's really stepped up for us in big games. Let's talk about knockout football. I mentioned the game against Real Madrid. Obviously, PSG was a stroll in the park. PSV was a stroll in the park. Funny enough, Arsenal actually beat PSG in the group stages of the Champions League, and Saka actually scored. That was when they crossed the free kick that kind of evaded everyone before going into the net. When Arsenal played PSG in the knockout round, that was a different machine. Saka has actually also been on the end of some stake. Can you remember that Euro 2024 final where England played against Italy? Saka missed the crucial penalty that saw England lose that game, and him and Rashford were on the end of some terrible abuse from football fans. That was quite terrible. That was terrible. Funny enough, Saka was even the player that was very instrumental in the campaign, getting them to where they were. But when he missed that penalty, that's Euro 2020, there was so much on him. And the guy was like, I think 19 or 20 at that point in time. I think it was 18 or 19, thereabouts. Then the last Euros, Euro 2024, Saka was also very crucial to them. He scored the important goal against Switzerland, and obviously England went all the way to the final before they lost to the eventual winner, Spain. But Saka showed up in that tournament for them as a big player. You'd expect him to do so. He has had some crucial missed penalties for us now. The two that come to mind is the West Ham penalty in the 2023 campaign. We were leading West Ham 2-1. That penalty that made it 3-1. But Saka missed his penalty, and West Ham went on to score a late goal to make it 2-2. And of course, that was coinciding with that bad run of games we had alongside Southampton and Liverpool as well before we lost to Man City. So yes, he has received some criticism in his time playing for us as well. But instead of shrinking, Saka showed something very rare: composure. He keeps on taking responsibility. He keeps on demanding the ball. He keeps on stepping up. That emotional resilience, especially at his age, is a marker of Arsenal legends. We have seen this before. When the chips are down, how the likes of Thierry Henry will just take a game at the scruff of his neck. Let's remember that game against Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. Henry got that ball from his half, slalomed his way through the entire Real Madrid defense and scored. Those are the kind of moments that show that his legendary status at the club. And Saka is getting towards that point. It's not arrogance, it's not belief. It's just that contagious feeling of knowing well how good this guy is for us and how amazing he is as well. So ask yourself, what does immortality mean? and Arsenal. As you can see from the slide, some players already have their statues at the club. Arsene Wenger, Tony Adams, Thierry Henry. I'm sure they are pretty much working on one for Ian Wright. He's someone that actually deserves one too. But let's be honest. To be an immortal at Arsenal, it's not a sentimental thing. It requires one, longevity. Saka is showing that right now. It requires two, influence. Saka is showing that right now. It also requires trophies and anchor memories. And that's where some improvement is still required. Players like Adams, players like Dennis Bergkamp, players like Henry, they didn't just win, they shifted standards. Saka is now approaching that threshold where being excellent is expected of him and being decisive is demanded of him. And this stage of his career will not be judged by his potential anymore. It will be judged by his impact. You know? Which brings me to comparing Saka with other Arsenal legends. You know, in his time at Arsenal, excuse me, in his time at Arsenal, Saka had been compared with a couple of legends. Players like, Thierry Henry that have been there with him, tried to guide him, showing the reins. But we don't necessarily have to make it like for like. It's kind of easy in terms of comparison. Because if you remember, every immortal at Arsenal had their unique lanes. Vieira was his authority. Vieira wasn't a scorer of 1,000 goals, but we knew the influence he gave to us in that midfield. Bergkamp was his artistry. When you think of the goal like the Newcastle where he spun behind the defender, or the Leicester one where he dropped it from the sky, it's exactly like that Dennis Bergkamp was an artist in every sense of the word. Tony Adams was his leadership. We all knew that, being Arsenal's captain for quite a young age, he continued to be in the club and led us to many trophies. Henry was his dominance. So right now, Saka's own is his identity, his consistency, and the trust we have in him. So looking at Saka, he represents that Arsenal Academy where, we pride ourselves, and this is one of our own. He's that emotional connection between we as fans and the club, because despite the fact that he had the numbers, he had the consistency to match. What we are seeing from Saka right now is that he's someone that is a player that we're going to love because of the fact that he belongs to us. He came from academy and he has grown to be one of the best players in the world. So yes, this is what is key: trophies and the final step. So far in Saka's career, the only trophy that he has won was the 2019 FA Cup. Yes, I put a picture of him holding the Community Shield, but obviously, the Community Shield is like just vibes. It's a trophy, but it's still vibes. So this is the uncomfortable truth that no video can escape, so no high video can escape. Without trophy, greatness stalls. If you recall what William Saliba said recently, that he has nothing in his pockets. He keeps saying how Saliba and Gabriel are one of the best defensive players in the world. But in all honesty, they have not had any trophy to show for it. Because even when Arsenal won the FA Cup, Saliba was still plying his trade on loan in France. I mean, we bought him in the 18-19 campaign as an 18-year-old, but he went to Saint Etienne, he went to Nice, he went to Marseille before coming back to play for us consistently. So without any major trophy, Saka's greatness will just be history. Saka needs to lead us to our Premier League title, and right now, he's one of the players leading the charge alongside Declan Rice, Victor Gyökeres, Gabriel Jesus, Martin Odegaard. Arsenal is currently on top of the Premier League, 50 points after 22 games. Only two teams have even had more points and went on to win the league, which was Man City and Liverpool. Liverpool in 1920 and Man City in 21-22 or thereabouts. Saka needs to also deliver big Champions League moments. Yes, he has had some, but we need more. And he has to now become the standard, because this is what will change everyone's perception of how great he really is for us. So finally, how will history judge Saka? Yes, there's been so many individual awards, but Project Saka is not complete, but it's still very real. The foundations are in place. He has the mentality, he has shown loyalty, his output is elite, and he has the identity of being a national player true and true. But immortality is not given at Arsenal, it is end. Slowly, painfully, permanently. Saka may not chase headlines, but he's beating something quieter. And history has a habit of rewarding players like that. So this is not about whether Saka is an Arsenal legend. He is already a legend in my eyes. But it's about how Arsenal are watching the rest of what's something that's going to happen. Project Saka is underway, and the ending is still being written. So now let me know what your thoughts are. Right now, we're still working on this journey with Saka, and we know that until Arsenal start winning these trophies, our players start getting recognized at the level we expect them to be. So what are your thoughts on this? I'd like to know them below in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're still on the road to 4K. Thank you so much for everyone that's been part of this journey with me. And I'll see you in the next video where I'm talking about the Man U preview. Till then, come on, you guys.